Welcome to another episode of the Accepted Authority podcast, where we look to solve common growth challenges that are stopping you from growing your consulting firm. And with me, as always, we've got Greg Rowith. G'day, Greg.
Hey, Andy. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here, as always, and thanks for listening as well. We really appreciate it. We're up to 100 downloads now, so that's a great little milestone. So thank you for all your support. Today, we have a great topic. It's very viable for, I think, everyone who's listening, and I think for all of us here as well. It's around sales conversations. It's something that's coming up fairly often, I know, with you, Greg, and your clients. But I guess we want to talk about how do we have better sales conversations? Because in consulting, there's a tendency, I feel, to jump straight to solution mode. And now with the way that the buyer's journey is going, and buyers have a lot of research that they've already done before they even get to you. So I feel like on your suggestion, Greg, it's a good chance to just explore how can we have more meaningful sales conversations to give ourselves the best chance of a better outcome. What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very important topic, and with the landscape changing so much, as you mentioned, buyers are so much more educated today. They learn a lot from the internet, so they tend to come into a sales conversation probably more aware and perhaps more ready to take control of that sales conversation, which is not the best place for a consultant to be, because ultimately, the best place is to be in control of the conversation and, take the conversation where, as a professional, that conversation needs to go. But I think, often we can get railroaded by our potential client if we hand over control to them. And, that tends to almost reduce the level of trust that they have in us in a conversation. And trust is an important part of selling. We have to establish trust before we're likely to be able to make the sale. So, to hand over the control of the conversation to our client sort of takes us out of that trust position and puts us more into a servant position, where we're, start to have to try to sell ourselves instead of, being the accepted authority as, the positioning that we want to adopt going into a sales meeting, having people already seeing us as the accepted authority and wanting what we have to offer. So when we have to start to convince and sell, we lose a lot of the power in that conversation, and I think, getting off track. So to summarize what I've just said, going into a conversation and having a process where we're able to control that conversation so it goes where it needs to go, and so that we learn more about our clients' issues and their challenges and how we can solve them, rather than handing over control to them.
And I'll let you have a drink if you need it. Thanks. That's an interesting point, because I want to ask a question around that. Why do you feel that a lead or a prospect tries to hijack the conversation? Is that a symptom that we haven't framed the intention of our conversation, or is it that they want to take control, or is it sort of a mixture? Do we need to be intentional about the way that we say, look, here's what we're going to talk about today. We've got 30 minutes. I've got some key questions. Why do you see that, Greg?
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the process is, that we need to go into that sales conversation with a framework, with a process to follow. And often, we get into the situation where we haven't set up that conversation appropriately and, before we get into the sales conversation. And often that comes about even when we have a referral and the potential client is approaching us. We'll get into a sales conversation and say, oh, so how can I help you today? And, that basically is handing over control to the client. So they'll tell us what they want from us. And, often, when I've been in that situation myself, having learnt the hard way, when they say, here's my problem, how can you help me? It's puts us in a position where we have to try to sell ourselves rather than if we're in control of the conversation and can lead them. And I think, the way I teach my clients is in the sales process, and the way I've tried to do it myself, is to be more like a doctor, rather than a salesperson, and take control of that conversation as a doctor would diagnose the situation, ask appropriate questions to lead them to a position where they can actually make a recommendation about what the course of action should be. In that process, the doctor's in control. Their professionalism and expertise comes through because they're able to, follow a string of questions that are, appear to be intelligent and based on their expertise, and so they can, lead the conversation, diagnose the problem, and probably add value in the conversation. When we talk about the symptoms, they can start to identify the cause, and I think that process needs to be reflected in our sales conversations as well, so that when clients talked about the symptoms and how their problems show up, we can identify the root cause of those and say, well, let's not put a band-aid on the symptom, but deal with the root cause. And here's how I'd recommend approaching that.
That's a really powerful metaphor, Greg, because as soon as you flip that conversation and you go into diagnosis mode, the pressure's off, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you feel like I'm not actually here to sell. And in a line that I've been using, which has been, now it's almost like autopilot for me, is I'll front by saying, basically, I've got some key questions and to find out more about your business, but also if or how I might be able to help. If I feel like it's a fit, we can book in a longer call. If I feel like it's not a fit, I'll tell you, and I'll do my best to give you some advice around that. And I think that just gets people, I think, at ease. But one of the things that what I feel like you're sort of going towards is that we're almost ingrained now. We've had all these sales conversations, and it seems to be that our leads, our prospects, sort of naturally want us to solve a problem, but it's almost like we're trying to fight against that tide as consultants, and we're sort of like, well, no, if the more of us can be doctors, then we're actually having a better use of our time throughout the whole process.
Yeah, and I think there's a real tendency for consultants and a desire, which is a positive thing, to want to solve a problem. And, naturally, that's what we're in business for. We have expertise about problem solving. We are problem solvers in our services that we provide. But when it comes to a sales situation, I've seen a lot of consultants, and often I've done role plays just to see how people sell. And it's almost like when the client starts to talk about their problem, the consultant is very quick to jump on that problem and say, I can solve that. I know how to solve that problem. Here's what we can do. And immediately you do that, you slip into selling mode. And as crazy as it sounds, the last thing as a consultant we want to be doing in a sales conversation is trying to sell. And, really we want to be able to be in a position to diagnose and really add value to our clients, to educate them around what their problem means to them, why they have the problem, what needs to be done to fix the problem. And when we're recommending a solution, we're not actually selling, ourselves. We're just talking about the best way to solve their problem. Here are the steps that need to be taken to solve a problem, not here's how I would solve that problem for you. And it really changes the dynamics when you can talk about the process of solving the problem And naturally then, when you do that, you want the response to be, oh, can you help me with that? And when you get that response, then you can talk about how you can help them. But until you get that, any attempt to talk about how you can help them slips into a sales conversation where, you start to, that sort of salesy approach creates resistance from the buyer.
Mm.
And there's the critical filters that jump into play around, that sales resistance. So they're evaluating and weighing up, why are you trying to sell me? They feel pressured by that sort of sales conversation. So when you can avoid selling and stick to recommendations and how to solve a problem, then the critical filters aren't there. They're open to be educated. They're open to learn what the solution is. And then they're willing to say, well, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great solution. Can you help me? And then they give you permission to talk to them about how to do that.
Yes.
Mm.
One of the things that I'm working through at the moment, Greg, is, and hopefully if you're listening or watching, you'll find you'll be in the same boat, is it's developing those questions that really help stretch the gap.
Mm.
So everyone can talk about the problems,
Mm-hmm.
and we know what people want, but it's really about how do we ask meaningful questions so it actually highlights in the lead's mind, in the prospect's mind, well, you know what, I do actually have a problem. I'm self-diagnosing. So it's a bit like you're saying, putting that doctor analogy, it's like poking you on the shoulder and saying, does that hurt? Well, yeah, it does. Okay, well, okay, great. So that you've established that hurts. Well, what about if I poke you in the head? Yeah, that hurts as well. Okay, so we're trying to ascertain reasons why. So what would how would you go about crafting the questions that really exacerbate and actually get the prospects to self-diagnose themselves?
Yeah. What I've found over time is that I developed a framework around the sort of questions to ask in a sales conversation. And the framework is around an acronym that I call GO Triage. So it's, applicable to that doctor's situation. But the GO part relates to the goals. So what are you trying to achieve? And then the obstacles. So what are the challenges or obstacles preventing you from achieving that? And then the triage part is, once they talk about goals and obstacles, it's, well, tell me more, go deeper. Often that first obstacles part is a superficial thing. Tell me more about that, gets them to open up and expand on that. Then the R stands for reflect back what you've heard. So reflect that conversation. Here's what I understand from what you've just said. So they feel understood in that process. Then the I is about the impact. So tell me about the impact of that challenge or the problem that you're struggling with. So they then start to explain, how it's affecting them, what the implications are. Then the A stands for the advantage. So what's the advantage of fixing that? So the positive side, if we solve this problem, what advantages would that give you? Then the G stands for what does that give you? So when you achieve those advantages, what does that give you? What outcomes? What's what would your life be like? When that situation is in evidence and you don't have that problem anymore. Then the E is for expected decision, and that is based on the fact that we've helped people think through the problem, the impact, the advantage of fixing it. So they should have a high degree of motivation at that stage to decide, yeah, we need to make some changes. We need to deal with this and we need to look at how we can get that advantage. Or, the alternative is going through that problem. Well, the impact's not really that bad. I don't really gain much by solving that problem. My decision is, well, we probably don't need to do anything about it. And so, it's not about manipulation or or trying to force a client to come to a decision where they need our services. It just actually helps. It's a framework for helping them come to a decision as to whether the problem they have and what they're trying to do needs some action or it doesn't. But more often than not, because the people we're talking to, we've probably filtered out and qualified to a fair degree, so that we know most of those conversations are going to lead to, we need to make some changes and do something about this. So, that framework I found, gives me a very simple process that I can remember to cover off those points and, help ask the right questions about, the impact and the, degree of pain or difficulty, and plus the positive side of what does it mean to fix that. And, it doesn't mean that you need to be terribly smart or even an expert in the client's industry or the situation that they're involved in. We can ask the right questions based on a framework that's fairly simple.
I love that. Thank you so much, Greg. And that was really valuable for me. I think that the key takeaways for our time together today was, first of all, there's a tendency to talk a lot when we need to ask better questions at the start. So make sure we ask the right questions. The second part was around being intentional. So we're not selling off the bat. We have a framework to use. And I think that third bit, which we talked about just now, go triage, write it down if you haven't already. That's a wonderful way to ensure that you highlight the key challenges, but also the impact, and get the prospect aware that there is the issue, and it's really about the urgency ratio and seeing if they can improve that. So sales conversations, I think that's a really valid, some valid information that we've shared today. Thanks so much, Greg. I know I got a lot out of it. Hopefully you did if you're listening as well. So
that's great.
Anything else to add to that?
There's if people want to know more about that process, and there's plenty of information I have on my LinkedIn profile. They'll probably find some videos or some articles about that or just search for Greg Roworth on LinkedIn. Otherwise, go to my website at businessflightpath.com, and lots of articles in my blog and some free ebooks that I have available there as well.
Awesome. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Andy Marmont, and also our website is concurve.com.au. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd really appreciate you leaving us a rating on iTunes or wherever you are listening. It just helps us create more impact and reach new consulting operators who might be interested as well and learn. So thanks again for your time. This has been the Accepted Authority. We'll see you next time.
See you later.